Hi, everybody. Today, we're going to interview about a film that is so important in the rock photography history. The photographer by name is Mick Rock. Judith and I knew we were very close with him in his life, and the film was made about his life. It's called Shot, the Psycho-Spiritual Mantra of Rock. It's an incredible movie.
It's an energy thing. In the height of the moment, I say assassin because that's what I feel like, and I'm going to take you out. I want that feeling. I think the name infiltrated into my psyche. If you wanted a rock and roll photographer, what would you call him? You'd call him Mick Rock. I hadn't done a lot of performance photography until David came along.
I just thought, well, I'll be David Bowie, the first David Bowie, that's all.
It was all designed to give people the idea. We don't know who he is, but he's got a personal photographer. He must be a big deal. Rock and roll nailed in that one shot. It was a complete revolution, and most people ignored it. New York, the Velvet Underground, a cold shiver went up my spine when he hit the stage. These guys, it's only the second time they'd ever been in a photographic studio. Bingo, there's the cover. I never felt like a voyeur. I was always on the inside looking out. I didn't stop to think about the implications of what I was doing.
There's 50,000 junkies in New York alone, and they serve a song too.
People often ask, when you nearly died, Mick, do you regret that I got myself into that state? Could it have been any different? And every time I ask myself that question, I say no. I always knew that this was the life I was meant to live. I'm like a thief in the night. Blang, 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 blang. I don't think I had a clue where I was going, but I was going to be going there anyway. So when did you have the time for all this, Mick? Well, I had never slept. If you don't sleep, you get about a bit.
And I just want to start the show by saying our co-host and foundation here is Jason Sam, known as Plastic EP, and he has interviewed the very famous in music. And my co-host Judith Salovitz and myself, you should know, are legendary album designers in major collections, including the Rock Hall Archives, and our interviews are in the Rock Hall Archives, and this will be one of them. This is part of our Music Legends series. I want to also mention in our life, Judith, in our life, Mick was really part of our life. He was in our 45 book, 545s. Iggy, the shot of Iggy, Raw Power is in it, and also the famous David Bowie with the saxophone shots in the book. And I interviewed Mick years ago on Blog Talk and two interviews on Punk Globe magazine, two-part series. And of course, I designed End of the Century, a Ramones album cover with a famous Mick Rock front photo that is historic. I want everybody to know another big thing that Mick uh, photographed for many Rock Hall inductees. The names are incredible. Tina Turner, Queen, Rod Stewart, Joan Jett, David Bowie, Roxy Music, Ramones, Lou Reed, Rolling Stones, Iggy Pop, Bob Marley, Debbie Harry, Talking Heads, Mark Bolan, Ozzy Osbourne, etc., etc. And also, I want to mention also that Mick did three amazing books that people should buy. One is called Exposed, about his life in photography. The other one is a Lou Reed book. I think Genesis put it out. And of course, the David Bowie book on Tasha is amazing. So let's get into it right away, and we'll get Judith will tell you a little bit bio of our guests today, which are Liz Vapp, Barney Clay, and Sal Scamardo. Go ahead, Judith.
Okay, well, welcome to our lovely guests. We're really excited to talk about this documentary about Mick. So we have Sal Scamardo. Hopefully, I'm pronouncing the name correctly.
Scamardo, yes, thank you.
Yeah, Sal's a great veteran TV film and music executive and producer who has collaborated with top artists, directors, and brands for studios globally, including CBS Fox, Universal, and Film Rise. We also have with us Liz Vapp. Liz is the founder and the creative director of Feral Cat Productions, creating customized experimental marketing and branding. She was the executive producer on Shot. And we also have with us Barnaby Clay. Barnaby is a British award-winning director of films, documentaries, and music videos, and Barnaby is based in Los Angeles.
Thank you, Judith. And now we'll get right into it, the film itself. And we're going to talk about certain things. We're going to also show Mick's photos along with the discussion as we're talking. So it's going to be really a great show. So let's start off with the film. It starts off right away with the heart operation that Mick had. He had two heart attacks. He had a quadruple bypass, and he was literally stayed in the hospital by two people, Alan Klein and another person who was very famous. Anyway, I forgot the name, but that's how the film starts off. And then we go into his life in the beginning. But let's start off with Syd Barrett. There's a photo shoot with Syd Barrett. Does anybody want to tune in with the Syd Barrett area?
Mick was at college. He was before he was like doing his rock and roll photography. He was studying English literature in Cambridge University, and he was kind of like on this course. I don't know what that was going to lead to, like maybe like teaching or some kind of a fantasy poet life that he had, and then he met down there, he met Sid and some of the people who would form Pink Floyd and got in with that kind of gang. And Sid asked him to take some pictures one day. He took a lot of acid and then kind of realized that all the pictures he'd taken of this young girl actually he didn't have any film in the camera. So that was like, but you know, there was something within that session which like turned him onto photography. And I think he just obviously like with all the subjects that Mick worked with, the kind of main theme between them all was that they all kind of trusted him like a friend, basically, who was on their
Yeah.
wavelength. And I think that was what happened with Sid. It was just like they immediately became friends. Yeah, they did like acid together, and that probably helped. And then yeah, it was when Sid was doing Madcap Laughs, and he was charged with asked to do the album cover, and that was really his first kind of. I think he'd done a couple of like small things, some live stuff for Rory Gallagher or something like that, but that was really the first thing that really kind of put him on the map.
Yeah, and then we get it, and then he talks a little bit about Mark Bolan, who's a rock and roll inductee, by the way, with T-Rex. But Mark Bolan, he did but then he gets into David Bowie, 1972 in New York City, and apparently there was a event where Lou played with Bowie on the stage. He talks about that.
It was all sort of like, not a big scene at that time. It was they were all friends. They all kind of interloped with each other and hung out. And actually, Susie Ronson, who ended up marrying Mick Ronson, was a friend of Mick's and was the one who created David Bowie's haircut and hair color.
Oh,
And
wow.
he met David because she was doing David's mom's hair and she was talking about her son. And then Angie Bowie came in, and Angie Bowie wanted her hair done. And then she said, "Well, will you come over to the house and do my husband's hair?" And it happened to be uh, David Bowie. And then she
Wow.
created the color and did his hair. So they all kind of like were like a gang that all knew each other and hung out. But David was very visionary as to creating a huge persona, and Mick was just very much along for the ride. He'd always talk about, David had bodyguards before he needed bodyguards. Like he would
Yeah.
walk in somewhere and have like massive bodyguards with him, and Mick following in suit, taking photos. and trying to get everyone's attention as to who this person was before he had even created a fan base, so to speak. So there was like a storyline and a lure, and I think Mick started to really understand that with David and contributed visually to that lure of the Ziggy Stardust era and performance through the photos he took on stage, setup shots and behind the scenes. There's lots of really iconic images. Obviously, one of the main ones is the one that's backstage at Cafe Royale, which is Lou, Iggy, and David hanging out. There's the one of Mick Ronson and David Bowie on the train, where they're having like bangers and mash on the way to like I think it was Germany, from what I remember.
Edinburgh.
And
Edinburgh.
there were
Edinburgh.
just moments. Yeah, that was right, Aberdeen. It was just moments in time, but they ended up becoming these, images that all these kids looked at and fantasized about what it was
Yeah.
like to be in that lifestyle, and Barney probably was one of them, like I was, yeah, and Sal.
He was looking from the inside out rather than from the
Yes,
outside in.
That's
So
right.
he was
exactly.
living that life that all these other rock and roll musicians were living. He was actually a part of that whole. I mean, I don't want to. I hate to use the word scene, but it was the scene. The
Hmm.
glam rock scene. Later, I don't think that it was that word glam rock existed then. I don't know when that came to be, but the interesting thing about Mick and what I think one of the reasons his photos were so spectacular was that he was on the inside, kind of
Mm.
looking
Yeah.
out at us. He was
Yeah.
Exactly.
this documentary is just visually so striking. It's just it's inspiring in an artistic way, but it's anyone that's interested or has even the slightest inkling of interest about the 70s and 80s of glam rock and that whole rock scene,
Yeah.
they would eat this documentary up, this film about Mick.
Also, a next thing, Iggy Pop and Raw Power. He did a striking image for Raw Power, which we took the 45 and put it on our 545 books, and that image is so strong of Iggy with a microphone, and there's no type on the front cover, by the way. It's just a photograph. It's an incredible image. And then what you went into, Judith, I was going to get into is glam, what he calls the avant-garde. And then shots of Brian Ferry, Roxy Music, Mick Jagger, Rod Stewart was a big one too, et cetera, et cetera. It's funny. I mean, when I went to a Mick Rock party in New York, as you well know, Liz, it was glam rock all the way. And there was no question it was a glam rock party. You know what I mean? And he had that whole era, that thing. Also, I want to get into also the Rocky Horror area, Liz.
Okay. Well, Rod Stewart, I don't think ever did a studio session with. I think he did some live, but the most iconic photos of Rod Stewart he has was basically an after party that uh, Mick Jagger, Rod Stewart, and Jeff Beck were doing in
Ah,
some girl's house in London. And basically, the police showed up and broke up the party. And when they showed they
wow.
realized it was Mick Jagger, Jeff Beck, and Rod Stewart, and Mick got these iconic shots of the policemen interacting with them breaking up, or I don't know at that point if they even broke up the party. I never really asked Mick that, but but that was that. Iggy, obviously, that was shot all at La Scala. I think the first time Iggy came over, I think David turned Mick on to Iggy. And then obviously, it's always that's how it always goes. Like, one musician introduce you to another musician, you got to get this guy to photograph you. And it like, the Mick Psalm was enamored with them and, shot these photos and, obviously got that one iconic photo that Mick used to say Iggy looked like an iguana, in which was the Raw Power cover.
Yeah.
So yeah, and just to go back to what Judith's saying, like Um, we're really proud of the doc because Barney had, we Sal and I had a specific vision that we didn't want a talking head doc.
That's
I'd
right.
always envisioned it to want it to
Mm.
be what everyone would always say to me was like when they would meet Mick for 10 minutes or 5 minutes, they'd be like, God, I just want to sit with him for like hours and listen to all his stories and him talk. And I couldn't give everyone that experience. And then I said, well, wait a minute, maybe there's an opportunity if create this documentary where I can kind of give someone that experience
Yeah.
with him. And Barney was able to understand that and really dive into it when now we were calling it hybrid doc at that time, but it wasn't really a thing. Now it's become more of a thing where, you know, having flashback scenes or scenes that are like, you have actors playing it, used to be like for, like snapped or something like that. It was all cheesy, but now it's done much more like high end. And it was so great to have someone like Barney who had this wonderful vision to be able to take Mick and really create the footage to go along with his stories and
Yeah.
not have it be like a whole bunch of talking head people being like, well, I remember Mick when, because at the end of the day, you really want the story from the person that experienced it. You really
And
wanted to
I
hear
was
it.
saying, if I
Yeah.
could say something about that, and yeah, Barney did a great job, really conveying just the richness of the material. We had so much to work with. And I think
Mhm.
the first time the documentary kind of came up, Mick was in my office. We were working on another project for JT Leroy or something, and he had gone
Mhm.
into his famous in the movie attic, digging for photos in the garage. Says, "Darling, I'll be back. I got to go, dig these out." And it came to the
Mhm.
office with and dumped them all on the light box. And we used to use the light box and with the loop. And we started looking at these photos and we picked out the ones that we wanted. And we had just amazing shots of all kinds of behind the scenes things. That's another story for
Wow.
another time. But he said, I've got one more thing I want to show you. And he says, do you have a DVD player? I've got this DVD. And he pulled it out of his pocket. We went into a conference room and we put it on, and up pops up, back behind the scenes, black and white, silent, video of David Bowie in the dressing room and David Bowie on
Wow.
stage, and all of this
Mm.
amazing footage. And I said, how much of this do you have? And he says, I've got a lot of it. And I said, I
Oh my
think there may
God.
be something to it. And that's really kind of where we started talking about, the possibility of doing a film, which took a long
Mm.
time to get done. But when it finally got done, the work kind of speaks for itself. But to Liz's point and everyone, we really just wanted it to reflect him, not only
Mhm.
his stories, because he chronicled so much music history in a firsthand way and in such an incredible way. For him
Mhm.
not to share those stories, we and the way he tells the story is very funny and had a great personality. But we had so much material to back it up with, to tell the story with, that Barney did such a great job stringing
Yeah.
together.
Now let's get into Queen. Now I want to bring up something. The Queen first album is iconic, but what's really interesting in the movie, he brings out Shanghai Express, the Marlene Dietrich movie, and that he was influenced by for the Queen photograph by the image of Marlene, I guess, on her head on a black background. And I thought that was real. I never knew that. I mean, that's incredible because I've watched the movie 40,000 times. I never put, and when it's mentioned in the movie, so, oh my God, now it makes sense. And he also mentions that Freddie was really the visionary eye of the group or the
Mhm.
visionary of the group. That was very interesting.
Mhm.
Of course, he did Queen too, but tell us about the Queen experience.
Well, from what I know from Mick, Freddie was a star before he was a star in his mind. Like Mick would tell a story that Freddie would walk into someone's room to sleep on their floor and act like he was doing them a favor. So Mick was really good with being in tune with reading people's personality and what they want. And he really kind of knew that about Freddie and knew that he was a big Man Ray fan and knew that he would really respond to these Shanghai Express photos and show them. And, Freddie was ready to be Marlena Dietrich at a time of drop of a hat. And so then Freddie was the one that would convey the band into kind of getting more glam and doing it up. I mean, obviously he was dating Mary at Biba. He was the one that was more into the wardrobe and the look. And he kind of, Roger was just like a guy's guy, but he slowly started to convince the band to kind of create this look. And then Mick was there for the capturing. But yeah, Freddie
Yeah.
definitely was the visionary from everything I remember.
Mick, again, from this like classical education, he was interested in a lot of art, a wide range of art
Yeah.
and a wide range of influences. And these are all the same influences that these guys were into.
Mhm.
I mean, less the kind of like, yeah, the other members of these bands, but like certainly the front people like, Freddie Mercury or David Bowie or Lou Reed, they all drew from a similar like well of influences. So it was kind of like a language that they had. And I think,
Yeah.
yeah, they just felt like Mick tapped into that. And so they could just share these ideas and these images could be generated very easily in that way. And there weren't that many people who were rock and roll photographers at the time. There's like a handful. There's like three or four, and so really like who are they gonna go to? They're gonna go to the one who actually kind of like gets what they're talking about and is gonna like bring them the Shanghai Express reference and say like, how about this? So yeah, it made sense.
Periodically through the movie, there are tapes of interviews with Mick and an artist. And this one, he has a tape of Lou and Mick together. I thought that was very interesting to throw the tapes in of those interviews in the movie, Barney.
Yeah, well, they came in like, Mick had this funny habit of like keeping stuff from me and then
Wording.
suddenly recording and then suddenly like you know a year and a half into editing he suddenly calls me up and he's like, by the
Oh,
way, I've got this tape of me talking to Lou Reed, you interested? And I'm like, of course I'm fucking interested, are you crazy?
yeah,
uh, or
yeah.
like or the Bowie one, and he did that quite often, like so he did have this like wealth of like footage and information and photographs, but like, he was really the gatekeeper and he was very like, he would pass that out like slowly, like give it to me. And but when he gave me those tapes, I've got to say they were just like a real game changer because
Mm,
I mean, because it's difficult because obviously we talked about like the fact that it's only Mick's voice in the film. And part of that was, yeah, Mick is such a great character that we wanted like him to be, you know, front and center of this film. But of course, like we're like, should we talk to Bowie? Should we talk to Lou? Both were alive at the time, but both were kind of like sick. So we kind of realized that if we spoke to anybody, we'd probably get Iggy, but like we'd probably get Debbie Harry, but like then we'd end up with a lot of lesser people as well. And it just felt like, well, this is maybe we should just keep it to him. But that
Mhm.
is, as a filmmaker, for me, that's quite difficult. So I have to just like
yeah.
make this, it makes it a lot harder. Especially sometimes he didn't want to give all the information away. He didn't want to talk about certain things. So it becomes difficult. But then the tapes were really just an amazing, because also you can really tell his friendships with them within the
Yeah.
tapes. You can really, the
Yeah.
one with
Yeah.
Reed is
You were
like,
you were in
poor,
on this like private
yeah,
conversation
yeah,
basically of
yeah.
sitting around doing whatever, talking about art and sharing their perspectives on all kinds of things in music, and which was great for the film. It really was just a magic, I think, turning point. I think
Oh,
Barney
absolutely.
got his hands on that. I remember how excited that was. But it was kind of
Yeah.
cool to hear them talk. Who doesn't want to hear an artist in their earlier years talking about what makes David Bowie, and what
Oh, yeah.
what goes on in their brain? So that was just a gift. But I think that was one of my favorite parts of the film was just watching Mick go through his stuff in his attic, and I don't think he even knew half of what he probably forgot about most of the stuff that was there, but as he's going through, you're seeing his reaction shots and the stories start to flow. It's really one of the funnest kind of most enjoyable parts of the film, I think, is just seeing him rummaging through his attic, and garage. It's just
He's
hilarious.
rummaging through his past, basically, and like, it's like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, that, and I did that. He's like, half the time,
And
he's
like
like
and like
shocked
a
that he
kid,
did
like
it.
I did this
getting
for the money, and
excited.
oh God, what was that all about? There's all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff happening.
What you just said, I mean, the real story in this documentary, in this film, is mixed pictures, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not just his stories, but it's the real crux of it. The story is all of his beautiful, iconic pictures, and then the stories behind that.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
the star.
It's nice to have kind of the book come alive because, he's told a lot of these stories in his books, but it's great just to sit down and turn it on and let him rip. And I know we have a ton of probably somewhere
And
hours of
also,
this talking. We could do like an audio series, Barney.
and
I do
also,
want to
I,
like mention his because we've spoken about his photos, but like as somebody myself who came from the world of music videos, we should also mention the fact that, he's one of the
yeah.
pioneer music videos. I mean, he
Yes.
shot like Life on Mars,
yeah,
he shot Genie,
Oh,
he shot like
yeah.
music videos for Paul McCartney, he's like really
right.
like they're in the genesis of music videos, and these videos are now they're like in MoMA, in New York. They're part of like a national collection. So it's important to bring that up because it was all a part of the same thing. It's like, okay, you're going to take pictures for me. Why not shoot this video as well?
And
And these
we
videos have
also,
become iconic.
I think he helped us understand just the power of the image and how important it is for these artists to be who these artists, are and how they became icons. So much of it was driven by the visual images that Mick took
Yeah,
in shaping
yeah,
who they were. So it was the music, of course, and the artistry, but the pictures, you can't separate them. Which was I always say he was part of the band. He was just as integral in their success, I think, as anyone.
If you haven't seen this movie, it's an experience. And I'll tell you why. Mick Rock might be passed away, but when you see this movie, you think he's alive. You don't know that. These new
right.
generations of fans, when they see it, and you take him in his studio where you got all these lights and these black and white shots, and he's in front of the artist 1 foot away taking photos, you think you're standing in that little circle. Like you
That's
bring him
true.
to life. This is what comes
Mhm.
across in the movie. It's realism. It's like a real
Yeah,
movie. Somebody who doesn't know
right.
anything about Mick Rock. And then you
They'll
see
know
Lou
about him.
Reed.
Yeah,
These iconic photos that are classics now will live on forever, whether on record covers or on film or whatever. You've just done an amazing job. It's an
right,
experience. It's
right.
realism. That's what came across to me.
Yeah. So let's go on to the punk era. And we're going to start off. I'll mention a little bit about the Ramones because I designed End of the Century with the famous Mick Rock front photo and the T-shirts. Now, I want to bring up something that's very interesting. I work with very famous photographers, and Judith and I have. And one thing about Mick that people have to know, he was great at color and black and white. But color is accentuated for me because when you see this album cover, for instance, with the primary color T-shirts of the group and the red background, you get an idea where he was at, which other photographers, maybe Anton Corbin comes close to where Mick was, in the color area, which I was very familiar with working on U2. But I'm just telling you, Mick was amazing in color. That album cover is historic. And it also is a controversial album cover because all the other album covers that the Ramones did were in leather jackets. And this one, they're in colored T-shirts, but it's an iconic cover. And when I saw it, as opposed to the leather jacket shots, by the way, I felt that shot was more intense than the leather jacket shots and became that historic cover. And of course, Mick went into other uh, punk era groups like Sex Pistols, Debbie Harry, and then we'll bring up Joan Jett, I Love Rock and Roll cover, right? Those are very
Mhm.
famous. So let's talk about those.
his time with Bowie, when he ended Ziggy Stardust, he had the opportunity to continue on with David, and he became sort of obsessed with Lou Reed and the lure of, I keep using lure, but the lure of New York. And he decided to come to New York, and that's where him and Lou, it became like his new muse. Not that, I think for a minute, him and David, but David sort of understood David was going into this German direction, like going to Berlin, and Mick was just much more interested in New York. And obviously, via Lou Reed, started hanging out with Lou, CBGBs, met Debbie Harry, met the Dead Boys, all the bands that would come through, and obviously the Ramones, and, started to like kind of, get into the punk scene, which was really happening at that time in New York in like, I think it was like 75, 6, 7 when Mick came over. So he just kind of went into that space, and it was just new and exciting for him. I also think like he saw, parallel to David, like he didn't want to just be known for the guy who did glam rock photos. He wanted to kind of switch gears as David started to switch gears. I think he kind of took note from that as well into wanting to create more than just the guy who did the glam rock stuff. I mean, even when he was shooting all the stuff for David Bowie, the label would come to him with like to shoot other strange artists, which is how he got a really amazing photo of like Dolly Parton. He did some country, and he also shot Motorhead at that time, and he also
Mm,
shot
wow.
uh who's Waylon Jennings, and cover
Waylon
for
Jennings,
Waylon
yeah.
Jennings. So I think he was starting to kind of see other musical interests outside, and there was punk ready for it, and Mick was ready for it.
uh, Towards the end, I know he did some shows I went to. He converted his photos into photo. I call it photo art, Liz. He
Mhm.
did these shows where he converted photo into art images. Tell us about that. That's an interesting thing he did with his photographs.
Well, I mean, I think Mick was just always trying, you know, I think the reason Mick was so full of life is he was always forward thinking. He was never he appreciated the past, and he understood the past, but he always wanted to be known for the now and doing something different and moving forward. And I think at one point where he got a little, not tired of photography, but just wanted to change. And again, he was in New York, the art scene was booming. He was, Basquiat and people, Warhol and all these characters that were out and about at the same time as him. So he, decided to start to get into, doing this photo rip art. And, obviously there was, lots of late nights and extra substances,
Yeah, I think he was doing a lot
started
of drugs at the
creating.
time as
Yeah,
well.
there was that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think that added to it. And, he started to create these pieces, and people started to really respond to them. And he did quite a bit. And then towards like the mid like early 2000s, let's say, he started to revisit it, when we were shooting like a lot of new artists, and he started to get into doing some rip art and stuff. He always wanted to challenge himself. I mean, it was so fun working with Mick because he was always so excited to hear new music or new artist. Or I mean, that's how we, ended up, having I was younger, I was going to school, I, was seeing these bands happening in New York, and I was like, Mick, why don't you come to me to see, the Yeah Yeah Yeahs or TV on the radio? And he would get super excited like a teenager, and we'd end up shooting him, and it was so magical because he never lost that, and that was really special. Worked with Mick for 30 years before his passing. Now I work with the estate. Um, he was a family member to me in lots of ways because I met him basically when I was 13 years old, and that's a story for another time. But this film is like I think probably one of the proudest things I did with him in that time. And we did a lot of
Mm.
stuff, and it was really important to me. It was important to me. It was done in a certain way. It was a very long ride, even before Barney came on, of trial and error.
Yes.
It took Sal and I like nearly like trying to get people to understand it and want to do something in the importance of it,
Mm.
and going through certain directors and knowing Mick's personality, and meeting Barney and just knowing this was the right person in terms of his vision. And just his temperament and knowing Mick would really work well with him. And Barney being so instrumental in bringing all the right elements in terms of DPs and the music. And it really is one of my proudest things that I did with Mick. And it's hard for me, honestly, to watch right now because of the things that you said, Jason. It feels raw and real. You are in the room with him again.
Yeah.
But I also realized that then we did it right because that's the experience that I wanted for
Yeah.
everyone. And I think everyone saw, and I think Barney wanted that, and Sal, and hearing you guys
Yeah.
appreciate it like you do, it really means the world. So thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Jason, Judith, and I feel that Mick should have that respect, and the Rock Hall Archives is going to do that. And we feel that's like an induction in a sense, even though he's not given an award. I think this is much better. It's an educational film, and it's all about him. That's much better than standing up there and getting an award, by the way. This is like, it's in there permanently. People can see it. And I want to
Yeah.
thank you all. You did a quality job. And, Mick meant a lot to us, all of us, Jason, me, and Judith, and of course to you. And thank you very much for being on. And everybody, go see this film. Thank you.
Thank
That was
you.
Thank you.